Hello, my name is Chris Lipscomb, and I am the co-founder of the HR Shop and COO of Blue Pencil. I'm joined today by my colleague Will Hurrell, who is our Director of Leadership and Management Development. He is also the assistant coach for Plymouth Albion Rugby Club and has previously been a professional rugby player playing at the highest level for championship winning clubs. So it's great to have Will here as we look at this whole issue of mental health, both in the sporting world and in the business world, and the synergies between the two. Clearly, mental health is a particularly big subject at the moment, as many of us are working from home or in some form of lockdown, and the evidence suggests that our mental well-being has been affected, understandably, by the virus. And this is an area which employers must look at very seriously and take action. But more importantly, is I've spent 30 years in the HR world. I've run an employee assistance program covering 20,000 employees. And the one thing which always disappoints me is that whenever one talks about mental health, employers always view it as a negative. And in fact, I hope that this webinar will show you that it's actually a positive and it can improve your bottom line if you do the right things by your employees. Before I go any further, let's I'd like to talk to Will now and actually introduce the subject within the sporting arena. And first of all, I wanted to ask you, Will, you know, first, what actually interested you in mental health, but also how is rugby is surely very different to the business world that we all know and love. So, what is the synergy, and how did you get interested in the whole topic of mental health?
Yeah, I got interested, Chris, from all the experience I've had with it. Really, the very highs and lows I've had through my career, but also the experience of other people that I've played with. The mental health ups and downs I've seen with them, and the huge impact it has on their performance and their well-being. In reference to it being relative to business, it's completely the same. They are both businesses. Rugby is a business and players are employees, and it should be run as such. So they are very similar in that regard, and they have the same problems with, looking after employees' mental health.
And one of the things then, just picking up on that, and you're talking about some similarities, but I mean, in terms of performance management, I mean, surely in rugby, it's something that people just feel passionate about. You don't really need anything around performance management because it's something which is intrinsic to the individuals who are engaged in the sport.
Well, what I'd say to that is that, rugby players are very passionate, but most people are passionate about their work. But when you are so passionate about your work, when things aren't going right, or if you're not being treated properly, it has a huge effect on your performance and your well-being. And so what I'd say to that is it doesn't matter what industry it is, whether it's law, sport, or whatever, they all have the same issues and the same things that need dealing with.
Okay, and you've moved now onto the management side of rugby as a coach with Plymouth Albion, and I think I'm very curious to understand then how is performance effectively managed, and what are the crossovers you see for the world of business around best practice?
Well, what I'd say is in rugby, you see a lot of different tactics and team tactics, but essentially what makes the difference on performance is the individual players, and that is down to how committed they are, how much they want to fight for the team. And it's exactly the same in business. Your business is going to be successful if you've got employees that are willing to go above and beyond to fight for your company, essentially. And that is the difference between mediocrity and having issues, people off sick is a big indicator of mental health, and having everyone wanting to be in work, wanting to do well, wanting to succeed, that is the difference. And that is what we're trying to get across, that if you concentrate on people's well-being and looking after that, they will reciprocate that with performance.
And can I just pick up on that? Because you've mentioned there the connection between mental health and performance, but how? Because we often think about it as being fairly intangible, but then how is it that managers can have any kind of impact on mental health when so much of what happens to people happens outside of work?
Well, it's all about the culture that's created by the people in power, in leadership positions. And what I would say is that having honest and open dialogue, having the relationships with your employees, and not just being a sort of figurehead that tells them what to do, having that, creating that culture of open and honesty, that's what creates the positive atmosphere and the positive mental attitude from your employees.
And does that, I mean, in business, we are very used to traditional performance appraisal processes, something which I personally have railed against most of my career, where one sits down with people perhaps every 3 months or every 6 months and gives them an assessment of how they are doing.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you believe is best practice around that, and that it actually has an impact on mental well-being?
Well, I think, every 3 or 6 months it's unacceptable in any business. You have to have consistent, honest, open dialogue, and that needs to be sort of weekly, every 2 weeks. You need to be connecting with your employees. And when you create those connections and that open culture, you will see things that are affecting them either positively or negatively, and you can pick up on them. That because when you create those relationships, you pick up on the little things that are either making them perform really well or making them perform not so well. And what I would say is, feedback is a huge part of that. And the way that feedback is given is massive. And it doesn't have to be huge things. And like I said, every week or 2 weeks, you can have sort of 20 minutes, 30 minutes with someone, and you can give them feedback and you can pick up on these things.
So what you're saying is it is very much around individual feedback. It's done regularly.
Yeah.
There's also something which I wanted to expand on. It's about how you do that. So, for example, if you've got issues with my performance, I mean, you're going to pick up on the things that I'm doing wrong. Is that how you deal with individuals, but you try and do it sensitively?
What I would say is, with feedback, is you want to be positive, and everything should be geared towards the positive. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that focusing on people's strengths will improve a lot more their performance. Now, people are going to make mistakes. That's unavoidable. But focusing on people's strengths, and what they will do is they will find ways around making these errors that they might make. They can accommodate them by working around their strengths, and they tend to develop a whole lot more when they get positive feedback.
Okay, but how does that work? So I'm just taking a rugby analogy. It is, if I'm a rugby player and I'm not terribly good at passing, I mean, how are you going to get me fired up to do better if you're only going to talk about perhaps the fact that I'm a good runner?
Well, funnily enough, Chris, this was something that I've actually had personally. I was always told that, I wasn't the best passer. And, when you get told that, it is a negative. But what I would like is to see someone go, look, you're an excellent runner. Keep running the ball, and that will open up opportunities for you to pass. And we can give you the skills to work on that little technical part of your game, the passing, and I can help you develop that. But the more you run and the more successful you are at running, it will make the passing easier. And that is, you know, in reference to business, it is completely transferable, that someone working on their strengths will say, right, I'm good at this. Yeah, I can really do that. Automatically, it makes those other things they find slightly more difficult, it makes them slightly easier, and they'll find ways, their own way of doing it, and doing it successfully.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a very critical point, and one which I completely agree with. The reality is that far too much management time is spent on looking at the areas of weakness and how we can improve people's weakness, whilst actually ignoring our strengths. And if we can play ourselves to our strengths, then that is the way forward. And that actually also has a very real impact on employee well-being. But one thing which I did want to say is, again, perhaps using a rugby analogy, if I am somebody who somehow finds myself working as a player in a rugby club, but I don't like contact sports, surely that's a bit of an issue. And what does that relate to?
So in business, it is crucial for employers. They have to employ the right people to do the right job. If you're employing, you know, someone who's very good at technical stuff, or, you know, computer literate, and you're employing them to do seminars to hundreds of people, you've got it wrong, and that's going to affect their mental health, and, you know, their performance isn't going to be great. So as an employer, we have a duty to put these people in their right positions, and that's for us to recognize people's strengths.
Yes, and I think that's another critical point which people forget. If you match people into the wrong jobs, whether it's through promotion or whether it's through entry level recruitment, that creates in itself poor mental health for the individual, because they do not feel suitably qualified and adept to do the role that they've been given. So you've got the recruitment side of things, the how you actually match people against roles is very fundamental. And also, as we talked about, when people are actually being performance managed, how you go about that is critical, and it should be more ongoing dialogue. And I wanted to pick up on what you also said about relationship, because something which people don't necessarily think about in terms of employment, but there is a relationship going on, isn't there? And how can the manager influence the relationship with an employee, and how does that have an impact on mental health?
Well, all the things we've talked about, they're only recognizable if you've got that relationship with the employee. You know, if you don't have much interaction with your employees and you talk at them or you tell them what to do, but that's the end of it, you won't recognize these little things. You won't recognize their strengths. So the interactions are crucial that we talk about. And, you know, you've got to think about what kind of culture you want to create in your workplace, and it's essential that you have these interactions with them.
Yes. And just talking about culture, and I guess this is as true of rugby clubs as a business environment. I mean, in your view, based on your experience in the world of sports rugby, and also as a coach, what is the kind of culture that makes people perform well? What are the ingredients of that culture as you see it?
Well, it's a lot of what we've talked about, but it's having those personal relationships with the players, making them feel valued, working on their positives, you know, the issues they might have, or we'll say weaknesses, but things they could do better, you know, attacking that in a positive way, and always talking about stuff from your experience. So not saying, right, this is the right way to do it, you're doing it wrong. What you'd say is, look, from my point of view, you know, you're excellent at this, let's help improve you at this. And it's the way you manage those individuals that brings out the best in people. And certainly I watched Wasps in the semis and the final, and they sort of came out of nowhere this season. And I was reading about Lee Blackett, and funnily enough, he'd got in a psychologist. Now, a lot of rugby clubs, well, I think almost all of them don't have a full-time psychologist. And that for me would be crucial to performance of a team as a unit. And he said, actually, at the end of it, he wished he'd got them in earlier. But clearly he's thinking and doing the right things, because they performed absolutely excellently in the semis and the final after having a poor start of the season and being poor for the last few seasons. So I think that just picks up on those management styles of, you know, everyone was absolutely fighting to perform at their very best, and it really showed through. So what I'd say is that, you know, he's clearly got that interpersonal relationship with his employees bang on, and he's doing the right things in the workplace.
And I think that the one thing which, from my own experience, I've spent quite a bit of time in employment tribunals in the past, what has always surprised me is particularly where you have got long-serving staff. An employment relationship is like marriage. People have ups and downs dependent on their personal circumstances. If you don't take any account of what is happening to them in their lives, and you manage them in the same way all the time, then the difficulty is that you aren't actually accepting that you're dealing with a human person who has their own problems. And so managing people sensitively, and of course knowing about what's going on for them, is about having that relationship to the extent that you know enough about their kind of challenges and pressures outside of work. And that's not just about being altruistic, it's because the more you know about an employee, the better it will help you to manage them.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you have said from the world of rugby completely resonates with me, because the way most appraisal systems, I believe, are completely flawed. But by having ongoing dialogue and managing relationships with those who work for you, you are actually best attuned to manage them both in a supportive way and effectively for the good of the business. And this is about the bottom line. And can I just ask you, I know that in terms of some areas of weakness that you may have spotted, I mean, in rugby, clearly physical injury is what we would class as a foreseeable risk. And employers face many different foreseeable risks for staff doing their jobs. It may be the risk of assault. But in terms of rugby, rugby clubs as employers, how good are they at dealing with these types of issues that come up?
From my experience, very poor. Certainly when you have some sort of long-term injury, you do feel you're sort of surplus to requirements, and you are left, you know, yes, you've got a rehab program and you work with a physio and it's get back fit, but you know, your interaction in the sort of team environment, it becomes limited. And that, like you've said, it's a foreseeable risk and a very real risk. And I think that needs to be managed far better. You know, you should be having someone to speak to about mental health during the, you know, a long-term injury, because you know, but not being able to do the job you're being paid to do is very difficult. And like you said, it's something that, you know, you love as a player, and you have to manage these risks. And like you've said, you need to have the support network in place. And for me, I do find it incredible still that rugby players don't all have a full-time psychologist. You know, they have 6, 7, 8 physios looking after physical health and a doctor. but
Yes.
not a full-time psychologist who can, he can have those interpersonal reactions from people, and he'll pick up on stuff and help people manage through these periods. And I'm not saying every business has to go and get a full-time psychologist, but
Yes.
like you say, mitigating those risks as much as you can is essential. And I've had a lot of dealings with law firms, and I think stress is probably the biggest one in a business like a law firm. It's a very
Yes.
real risk. It's very there, and I
And I
think
think
you need to
yeah,
manage that. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was going to say you need to manage that as best you can, and have the support networks in place to deal with that.
yes, that's completely true. And I mean, you've mentioned a couple of things here. Business is always focused about physical health, but I can actually tell you that a lot of physical ill health is actually linked to mental health.
Yeah.
And one of the difficulties is actually very few businesses offer their employees access to employee assistance programs or support. And it's not necessarily about these things being funded, but at least for managers to be able to guide people in the right direction can be critical. And particularly at the moment with the stress that people are under because of the virus, stress can be something that is viewed under disability discrimination, particularly where people have long periods of stress-related absence. And so there is actually a very solid reason why people need to be thinking about this very carefully, although we're emphasising the positives for the bottom line. But of course, there is also an argument by doing the right things that you actually do, as you said, mitigate the risk of claims, which are increasingly coming through from things like anxiety and stress, which are indeed covered or can be covered by disability discrimination.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have talked, Will, now about a number of key areas around performance management, relationship management, culture. Perhaps I'd like to just ask you to leave us with some pointers. And I know that you've got a slide which you wanted to share with us, where you've got some things where employers can then go back to base and think about how they're going to address this issue for themselves. And of course, we're always happy to deal with any questions or issues that people have. Our email addresses are on the screen, but I think we want this to be something tangible for people, because there are things that can make a very significant difference and will actually improve performance. So if I may, Will, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can take us through them.
Yeah, I think just from me, I think we talk about mental health and we've talked about the positive benefit it can have to performance with a business. And, we've talked about the risk of negative mental health, stress, potential claims. And we're talking about, very low, depression, anxiety, and very high, very positive. But realistically, we're mostly somewhere in between. And it's just about managing that in between bit so that you're steering clear away from the negative end of it. So key for employers to have a support structure in place. So, if anyone is struggling, they have someone to talk to. They have a process where you can go through to deal with any issues that arise, whether that's work-related issues, and they come and talk to you as an employer and say, look, I'm struggling with this. Can you give us a hand? Or, something separate. It might be a social issue, home issues, working from home issues. And I think creating the right culture is key to that as well. So having the support networks in place, but creating that the right culture, it isn't easy, and it has to start from you as an employer, and you have to be saying and doing the right things from the off.
Can I I'm going to jump in there and just echo that. It is that it doesn't work unless it is top down, so that people see, if you're the CEO of a business, if you're a director of business, that you're actually walking the talk. if you believe in creating an honest, open culture, you have to personally have credibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and if you've got managers below you that are managing large groups of people, you need to be getting them together as a meeting and saying the exact same thing, saying, look, this is how I want it to be managed. I don't want you shouting at people. I don't want you publicly doing feedback, all this sort of thing. And it'll filter down. And it's about setting your stall out early and, creating the right culture. It can be many things, but it could be something as small as having, the last hour on a Friday, having a quiz with everyone, or, anything like that. And
Yes.
what it does is it just shows that you are interested in their mental health, and they will respond to that.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, if you had to, I know you've got a number of different bullets there. I mean, and they're all equally important in many ways. But for you, if there is one thing that the one sort of lesson that you think that people need to look at, which is perhaps the truly critical at the current time, what would be the one that would really do it for you?
Yeah, for me, it would be the positive feedback is crucial. Focus on people's strengths, positive feedback, and always do it from your experience. So you say, look, in my view. So you're not saying to them, you're doing this wrong. This is how you're supposed to do it. You say, look, in my experience, this has worked for me, and they'll respond to that, and that's it puts them in a positive state of mind for them to react positively. And and I think that's the biggest focus. But to do that, you have to have the interpersonal relationships. So those two things are key for me. It's the interpersonal relationships and the positive feedback.
And I would echo that, Will, 100%. And really, when you look at it closely, what you can see is that mental health, positive mental health, comes from good, effective management, ongoing dialogue, and relationship management. All of those things can really help you. It's where firms do it badly or do it wrong that invariably you see issues arising. And of course, looking at taking mental health seriously is also very positive for your employment brand, for your employer brand. It is when you become known as an employer that is supportive, caring, you've got good levels of employee engagement, and generally that transfers to low levels of absence, then you also become an employer of choice. So it's a very powerful argument. So, I'm very grateful to you, Will, for your contribution, and I hope that those listening to this webinar will have got some takeaways that mental health is not the abstract that some people have in the past felt it is. It is something which is actually quite tangible, and it's something that we can actually enhance and improve by managing people effectively. So I would like to thank everybody very much for joining us for this webinar, and thank you, Will. And please do send us any questions or queries you might have. We would be very happy to assist. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And just the email there, Chris, mine's willh@bluepencilglobal.com, and yours is chris.lipscomb@bluepencil-legal.com, just because they're a bit blued out there.
Thank you very much, Will. That is useful so that people can actually contact us. So thank you, Will, and thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you.
Cheers, Chris.